I am Claire Whitlow, 36 years old. I used to believe that if I stayed loyal long enough, if I waited quietly, they would remember I was part of the family too. But then I received an invitation with no name, just a note that read, "We're still missing one face for the photo." No one ever said, "We've missed you." No one asked, "How are you living now?" There was only silence timed just right to ease their own conscience. And I understood being present is never enough when someone has already chosen not to see you. And I no longer need to stand at a door that was closed long before I arrived. I used to think if I showed up enough, eventually they'd notice I'd stayed. The family thread lit up sometime after lunch. A string of messages, centerpieces, dessert assignments, folding chairs borrowed from the firehouse. Rachel had offered to bring Ellie's banana pudding. Henry replied with, "Only if you leave out the coconut this time," and Mom posted a photo of the long oak table with the caption, "Room for 14. I counted. My name wasn't mentioned, not once. The thread had started up again without me. Hadn't muted it. I just wasn't needed to be looped in anymore. I stared at the string of texts from where I stood near the stove, the kettle clicking behind me, the cabinet door still ajar from grabbing the tea bags. I typed slowly. "Do? I need to bring the deed copies for Grandma's land." The bubble showed red. Then nothing. I set the phone down next to the chipped blue mug, the one I never bothered to replace. It still bore the faint stain of an old coffee ring near the handle one I'd stopped scrubbing out months ago. When the phone rang an hour later, I didn't expect her voice. "Claire, honey," Mrs. Grant said softly, "I probably shouldn't be the one telling you this." I waited. "Your mama asked me to remind you. It might be better if you don't come this Sunday. She thinks too many voices could confuse things. She said the tone's already set." My hand rested on the edge of the sink. I could feel the ridge of porcelain under my palm. I didn't answer. She said not to make it harder than it already is. I thanked her. Politely. Like someone declining a second cup of coffee out of courtesy. When I hung up, I didn't cry. I just stood there while the water in the kettle went cold. I rinsed my cup out, dried it with the towel that never quite lost its bleach spots, folded it neatly, put it back. No one had to tell me not to come. They already had. That night, I reread the message thread. Twice. I told myself maybe it was just an oversight. Maybe someone had forgotten to tag me, but when I scrolled to the top, the invitation itself was there, plain as day. Planning meeting for Sunday. All core family. Bring estate docs if needed. The word core stuck to my ribs. I clicked on the names. Margaret Ashford. Henry. Rachel. Their spouses. Even Ellie's name was mentioned with a reminder to bring crayons. I pressed the screen down slowly, as if I could flatten the ache that bloomed in my chest. In the corner of the room, the floor creaked. Not from footsteps, just the way old wood settles when it's been holding weight too long. I stayed up late that night, not from insomnia, but from a kind of stillness that doesn't permit movement. I boiled water again. I folded laundry I didn't need to. I opened a drawer and closed it without taking anything out. I didn't write back. The next morning, I found an old envelope tucked in a folder near the bookshelf, yellowed, the seal brittle. It was a card from 2 Christmases ago. The front had a snowman, family, mother, father, children. Inside it read, "Wishing you warmth, love, and connection." Only it wasn't signed. Not by anyone, just blank under the message. I remembered holding that card when it arrived. I'd wondered if the absence of names was a mistake. Now I knew better. That night, Rachel texted me just 3 words. "You coming Sunday?" I stared at them for a long time. Then I typed, "Did Mom ask you to send that 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then nothing?" I didn't press. By Friday, the grocery store near my apartment had already set up the fall display maple leaf garlands, canned yams on discount cinnamon brooms that smelled like manufactured nostalgia. I walked past them without stopping. I noticed a small girl near the checkout, reaching for a box of caramel candies. Her mother tugged her hand gently away and said, "No, sweetheart, not this time." The girl didn't cry. She just looked down at her shoes. There was something familiar in that, how quiet children learn to make their longings smaller. At home, I poured myself a glass of water, sat at the table and opened my laptop. I looked at the calendar. Sunday's block was already marked family planning. I didn't delete it. I didn't change it to not attending. I just let it stay. There was no invitation to turn down. Only the echo of what had already been decided long before, I noticed. I think some doors don't slam. They just stop opening. And after a while you realize maybe they were never meant to. I thought if I kept smoothing the edges, eventually there'd be no sharp corners left for them to step on. When I was younger, I memorized preferences like scripture. Mom preferred her coffee without cream, but with exactly 1.5 sugar packets. She hated lukewarm pasta and despised store-bought icing. Rachel's birthdays were always hard for her, so I made sure the decorations were simple, no balloons, no songs. I stayed behind after church potlucks to clean the foil pans even when I hadn't brought anything. The unspoken rule was, don't draw attention. Don't interrupt the rhythm they've already chosen. No one ever said thank you. One summer I worked the late shift and traded weekends with a colleague just to make it back for Ellie's 3rd birthday. Rachel had forgotten to order a cake, and Mom wouldn't make one just for a toddler who wouldn't remember. I stopped at a gas station on the way and bought whatever they had in the cooler, a lopsided vanilla one with blue roses and no writing. I arrived breathless, sunburnt, holding it like a peace offering. Mom glanced at it, then back at me. "Next time, don't bother if it's going to look like that." I didn't answer. I just cut it into even squares and handed them out with mismatched forks from the drawer with the broken runners. Ellie smiled through a mouthful of icing. That was enough. When Rachel brought Ellie back to live at Mom's house after Roy slammed the door on them, I didn't ask what happened. Rachel's arm was bruised. Ellie wouldn't let go of her toy lamb. I offered to pick up groceries. I dropped off Tylenol and frozen soup. Then I waited in the driveway until they invited me inside, which they didn't. 2 weeks later, when Ellie had a fever and Rachel didn't have a car, I left work early even though I had chills and a sore throat. I told the front desk I was fine to drive. I didn't tell them I couldn't feel my fingertips. When I got to the house, the porch light was on, but the living room curtains were closed. I knocked twice. Rachel opened the door, face, pale hair, damp. I didn't say anything. I just reached for Ellie and carried her to the car. Mom stood behind Rachel, arms crossed. "You never stay long enough to actually help," she murmured. I remember nodding, like I agreed. There was a photo on the hallway shelf taken that same year. All of us at the Lake Henry in the center, shirtless and sunburnt. Rachel in her oversized sunglasses. Ellie with juice on her chin. I was off to the side, cropped halfway by someone's arm. When I mentioned it once, Henry laughed. "You're always hovering in the background, Claire. Like a shadow with sandals." I didn't reply. I just made sure to take the group shot the following summer so no one had to stand out of frame. During family arguments, I played the part of silence. Not because I had no opinions, but because I believed neutrality earned me a seat. I listened while Mom accused Rachel of being careless for keeping the baby. Women who can't hold a man shouldn't be raising girls alone. I stood next to the fridge that night, slicing apples so thin they curled. Rachel's eyes burned. I sliced another. I thought my presence was enough. When Henry told a room full of people that I'd finally found a job that suited my personality, quiet and low maintenance, I laughed too. Not because it was funny, just because it was easier than correcting him. Mom looked up from her plate and added, "Well, Claire's never been the type to make waves. That's why she's still manageable." I didn't know what the last word meant. Not exactly, but it stayed with me longer than the rest of the meal. Manageable. I wore that like a uniform. Not too loud, not too needy, not too far from reach. Reliable, but not central, never asking for anything that would make anyone else shift in their seat. There was a jacket I used to wear to family gatherings, a faded grey corduroy that Rachel once called forgettable, in the best way. It had a loose button near the hem and pockets deep enough to carry breath mints, receipts, tissues. I kept it folded at the bottom of my closet for years. I only stopped wearing it when I realized no one would notice if I showed up without it. Or without myself. Mom always praised Rachel's resilience. She gets knocked down, but she's fierce. She stands back up. She called Henry determined even when he missed graduations and forgot anniversaries. Me, she's good at being quiet. Mom once said to a family friend at Thanksgiving, "Claire doesn't complicate things. I brought the pecan pie that year. No one ate it. It sat untouched beside the ham until it sweated through the foil and the crust sagged. I cleaned it up without comment, took the dish home and washed it twice just to scrub the stickiness out of the corners. I don't think I stayed silent because I had nothing to say. I think I stayed silent because I believed somewhere deep down that the cost of speaking might be exile. And exile then seemed worse than absence. Now, I'm not so sure. Sometimes what stays isn't what was said, it's what no one remembered to say at all. There's a drawer in my hallway I avoid opening. It sticks on the left side and smells faintly of dust and lemon oil. Inside are old Christmas cards, the kind that come pre-printed with smiling families and glossy foil borders. I kept them not because they meant something, but because throwing them away felt louder than I wanted to be. Every card from my mother's mantle had the same return address. The ones she saved were carefully taped along the banister corner to corner, like bunting. Her own the ones she sent were printed in batches, gold cursive letters, and a watercolour pinecone. Warmest wishes from the Ashfords. Below that, Margaret, Henry, Rachel, and Ellie. Always those four. I used to tell myself it was just a template mistake. The company forgot to add my name. Or maybe they charged extra for 5. I never asked. I just took mine down when it arrived and slid it unopened into the drawer that sticks. There was a notebook I filled in college lined with notes about behavioral theory and human attachment. I'd earned a scholarship full ride out of state early acceptance. When I called to share the news, I could hear a vacuum humming faintly in the background. What kind of job do you get with a degree like that? No. Congratulations. No pause, just that question clipped like an invoice. I remember gripping the corner of the page until it creased. I didn't argue. I just packed my bags and left the copy of the acceptance letter folded on the kitchen counter. She never mentioned it again. Years later, when I closed on my first house, a small 2-bedroom near the library, with wood paneling and cracked tile in the bathroom, I invited her to see it. I sent pictures of the key in my palm, the sold sign, leaning against the porch steps. Her reply came 3 days later. You shouldn't take on that kind of debt alone. If it goes under, don't expect help. The message came without punctuation. I stared at it for a long time, unsure which part hurt more, the warning or the word alone. The first winter I spent there, the pipes froze. I wrapped towels around them, sat on the kitchen floor, and waited for the heat to catch up. It took 2 nights. No one came. I didn't tell anyone they'd burst the next month. I kept a cracked mason jar beside the sink. I used it to hold old tea bags. I liked how they stacked faint ghosts of warmth used and dried out. It reminded me of conversations with her. Steeped once, discarded politely. Once I called ahead of a family gathering to ask what she needed. Nothing. Henry and his wife have it covered. You just show up, Claire. I showed up. I brought pie. I carried chairs from the garage. I watched her hand Henry the carving knife and say, "Let him do it. He's steady." When I cleared the plates, Rachel leaned over and whispered, "I'm so tired of always being the one who needs help." I almost laughed. I didn't. Instead, I handed her a glass of water and wiped the counter twice. The night Ellie got sick, Rachel called me breathless. Roy wasn't answering. Mom said she was too tired to drive. I threw on an old sweater and left without brushing my hair. At the ER, I held Ellie's hand while they took her temperature. Rachel sat next to me, eyes rimmed in grey, hands shaking. Roy arrived 40 minutes later, smelling faintly of beer and road salt. He didn't ask what happened. He just stood in the doorway until someone noticed. He looked at me like I was in the way. When we got back, Mom asked how late the hospital had kept us. "You really think it was worth all that fuss? Children get fevers?" I didn't respond. I just folded Ellie's blanket over the armrest and drove home in silence. It was raining, but I didn't turn on the wipers right away. There's a ring I keep in a velvet box. It isn't from anyone. I bought it myself at a thrift store in my 20s. Thin gold, slightly dented with a pale garnet in the center. I wore it during every family event for years. I used to think maybe someone would notice. No one ever asked where it came from. During a New Year's dinner, Henry toasted to those who keep showing up, then looked directly at Rachel. Mom clinked his glass and smiled. I raised mine too. No one looked my way. Later that night, I rinsed dishes at the sink and watched my own reflection in the window glass, faint, almost transparent. I touched the ring, wondering if I'd worn it too long for it to still mean anything. The next morning, I left it on the nightstand. I haven't worn it since. Some things don't leave bruises. They leave outlines. You don't even feel them at first. Not until the air moves through them. And by then, you've already learned to carry the shape. Some betrayals don't echo, they settle like silt at the bottom of a cup, unnoticed until stirred. Emily's voice had always been even measured. Years ago, I trained her during her first month in social services. She used to wear ballet flats even in winter and carried peppermint gum in her blazer pocket. When she called, she didn't use pleasantries. She got to the point like someone setting down a glass just hard enough to be heard. There's a motion being filed this week. Petition for custody and guardianship over Ellie Grace Turner. Your mother's name is listed. So is Roy Beckett. I didn't speak. I wrote it down. Not the whole sentence, just the names. Rachel hadn't mentioned anything. Ellie was still in school. There was no warning. Only that sentence now heavy on paper that began to curl at the corners from how tightly I held it. I drove without music. I kept one hand on the wheel and the other over the notebook as if holding it down could stop any of it from becoming real. The sky had turned the color of cold dishwater and the windshield wipers dragged across the glass like they were tired. Rachel opened the door on the second knock. Her eyes were red-rimmed, nose raw. She stepped aside without speaking. Ellie lay curled on the couch, flushed and still breathing through her mouth. There was a blanket, thin and slipping. No thermometer in sight. No medicine bottle on the table. Just a damp paper towel, crumpled into the corner of a plate. In the dining room the light was on. Papers spread across the table like a meal no one intended to clean up. Signatures half-filled, highlighted fields, legal language dressed in the pretense of protection. I recognized the form guardianship transfer with medical provision override. Roy's name was already typed. Margaret's handwriting filled the cosigner line, tilted slightly to the left, the way she always wrote her M's, with that unnecessary second hump. I stood at the edge of the rug. She didn't look up. "What is this?" She didn't flinch. Contingency. Someone has to think ahead. That girl's been raised on chaos. I looked down at Ellie, then back to the woman who once crocheted booties before she was born. She's Rachel's child. Margaret flipped to the next page. And Rachel's hardly capable of planning dinner, let alone a future. I'm doing what needs to be done. I waited. I didn't blink. You didn't tell her. Her voice thinned. I didn't think it was necessary to burden her with paperwork. Roy has offered structure, and frankly, he's the only man who hasn't run. She tapped a signature line with the tip of her pen. At least one of you ought to be grateful someone's stepping up. I couldn't feel my hands anymore. Only the edge of my coat sleeve brushing my wrist. Roy isn't her father. He isn't blood. He hit Rachel. Margaret didn't look away. He disciplined chaos. There's a difference. I stepped back just slightly, as if even the air between us needed space. In the living room, the heating vent clicked softly. Ellie stirred but didn't wake. Margaret returned to the page as if the room had emptied. Children don't thrive in instability. I've watched it for years. Rachel spirals. You hover. Henry disappears. And Roy! He shows up. That's worth more than your feelings. I thought about the hospital bill I paid last year without saying a word. The ride home in the middle of the night with a sleeping child in the back seat. The worn-out sneakers I replaced with the exact same brand, so Ellie wouldn't notice. She never thanked me. I never needed her to. But this was rewriting the story in ink without asking who'd lived it. I looked down at the pen she held. It was the same kind we'd used at the bank to close out my grandmother's estate. Slim barrel faux gold cap initials etched faintly in black MEA, Margaret Elaine Ashford. She always kept it close as if the object itself verified her authority. I remember touching it once as a child and being told not to. That's not for play. Neither was this. Rachel stood in the doorway, arms crossed over a sweatshirt 2 sizes too big. Her mouth opened, then closed. I didn't know. Margaret didn't turn. If she were paying attention, she would have. Rachel took 1 step forward. Her voice wavered. You're not helping. You're undoing. Margaret's hands never stopped moving. I'm correcting. I looked at my sister, then at the girl asleep behind her hair, damp at the temples, stuffed lamb resting against her chest. Some things don't shatter. They just stop holding shape. Margaret signed the final page, folded the document in thirds, slid it into a manila envelope. She offered it toward me. Since you seem so invested, take this with you. Read it properly before casting stones. I didn't reach for it. I didn't speak. I watched the envelope sit there, its corners crisp, its weight small but solid like something already sealed long before I ever walked through the door. And for the first time I realized this wasn't care misshapen. It was control dressed in the language of concern. She called it love, but what she meant was obedience, and what she took wasn't a child or a signature or a say. What she took was the last inch of room between us that still resembled family. I used to think leaving required noise, a slammed door, a shouted name, a final word, but sometimes departure sounds like nothing at all. The group thread buzzed twice after I got home. I didn't open it. The last message I saw was from Henry, a picture of a new set of patio lights for the backyard, and a caption that read, "Rachel still planning to bring the lemon bars." I didn't respond. I didn't delete the chat either. Just let it sit there, unread, like something left behind on a table after everyone else has gone. In the kitchen, the envelope my mother handed me still rested by the sink. I hadn't opened it. I didn't need to. The weight of it was enough, stiff, unyielding like her voice had been. Rachel stood by the window for a long time. Her mouth opened once, then closed. She held the back of a chair like it might hold her up. I didn't ask her anything. I didn't tell her what to do. "I don't think she sees what she's doing," she whispered. She was wrong. Margaret had always seen clearly, just not fully. I packed only what I knew wouldn't be missed. The spare toothbrush, the manila folder I kept in my glove box, with Ellie's pediatric records, the laminated copy of her insurance ID. I tucked them into the side pocket of my bag. The birth certificate copy was folded neatly in my wallet from last year when Rachel asked me to hold it just in case. She didn't say in case of what. Near the dining room, a wine glass still sat on the table, untouched rim smudged from half a sip. I recognized the bottle. A gift from Henry's wife last Easter. Margaret said she'd save it for something worth drinking to. She hadn't. I laid the car keys beside it. Not my house keys. Just the spare I'd kept in my purse in case Rachel ever locked herself out. I didn't think she would anymore. I wrote on the back of an old receipt. The ink smeared slightly because the pen dragged over an oily corner. I didn't rewrite it, just folded it once and slid it beneath the keys. I didn't include my name. I didn't have to. When Rachel asked where we were going, I said, "Away." She didn't press. She wrapped Ellie in the soft grey blanket that had been at the foot of the guest bed. It had a tear along one edge where the seam had loosened. I almost reached for the sewing kit before stopping myself. Some things don't need mending. Ellie's cheeks were still flushed. Rachel whispered her name twice. No response, just the quiet rhythm of a sleeping child, too tired to understand the edges of what's been lost. We left before the porch lights came on. The air was thick, not with fog, but with something heavier, the kind of damp that doesn't bead up, just clings. The driveway was gravel uneven. My shoes crunched once before I stepped onto the path. Rachel didn't close the door behind us. I did. On the way out, I noticed the chipped porcelain dish by the coat rack. It used to hold safety pins and loose buttons. That night, it held one gold earring, a paperclip, and a dried bay leaf. Margaret always said she kept it there for little things worth keeping. I didn't take anything from it. The back seat of my car still smelled faintly of peppermint. Ellie stirred once, turned toward the window, and fell back asleep. Her hand curled around the edge of the blanket. Rachel sat beside her, knees pulled up. She didn't speak. The roads were slick. I drove slow. The wipers left streaks I couldn't clear. I passed the pharmacy where I once picked up antibiotics for Ellie. I didn't stop. The neon open sign blinked like a pulse. It faded in the rear-view mirror. Somewhere near the freeway on-ramp, Rachel asked quietly, "Do you think she'll try again?" I didn't answer. There was a crumpled grocery list in the side door pocket. I'd written it weeks ago while on hold with the insurance company. Flour, unsalted butter, oatmeal, children's chewables. The paper had softened from the heat. I tossed it into the glove box. Rachel leaned her head against the glass. She always said you were the practical one. I never really knew what she meant by that. Neither did I. The gaslight blinked on. I didn't react, just kept driving. In the passenger footwell, a pair of Ellie's old shoes had come loose from her bag. The laces were tangled. One sole was peeling. I tucked them under the seat without looking at Rachel. We didn't speak again for the next hour. When the motel sign finally came into view, I pulled over, not because it was a destination, but because the motion of continuing had reached its limit. I didn't check my phone. I didn't reread the receipt note I'd left behind. I didn't wonder if the wine glass was still full, or if Margaret had opened the envelope again out of curiosity or out of spite. Some exits are loud, dramatic, shattering. Mine wasn't. It was a door left gently closed behind me, a drawer I no longer opened, a cup I stopped rinsing, and when the silence settled, it didn't ask to be understood. It only asked to remain. I didn't need space. I needed somewhere I wouldn't be rearranged. The apartment smelled like dust and leftover paint when I signed the lease. 2 bedrooms, if I was generous with the term. The floor creaked even without weight. A section of baseboard was missing behind the kitchen trash can. The air vent in the hallway buzzed like an old bee trapped behind glass. Still, I memorized the pattern of the floorboards by the second day. The kettle on the stovetop had lost most of its shine. I didn't replace it. It hissed a little before it boiled, and that felt right, somehow something tired still doing its job. The drawers stuck. The bathroom mirror had a streak across the middle that wouldn't scrub out no matter how many paper towels I used. The window by the sink faced the alley, but in the morning the light softened into something close to peace. Rachel moved slowly through those first few weeks. She wore socks to bed and drank her coffee cold. Sometimes she'd sit on the edge of the tub with a towel around her shoulders, not looking at anything. Ellie called the bathtub the quiet boat. Dr. Caldwell came on Thursdays. Rachel never spoke about it, after just tucked her appointment card into the back of the kitchen drawer and let it sit there under the rubber bands. Ellie's new school was 7 blocks away. She made it through the first day without crying. She brought home a paper crown with her name misspelled and wore it to bed. The next morning she asked for cereal with milk, but didn't finish it. At night, she drew. Crayons worn down to the paper wrappers. She gave me 1 picture each evening like an offering. One showed a blue house with a heavy lock on the door. Another had 3 stick figures beside a tree with crooked branches. The tree had tiny red dots that looked like apples or maybe wounds. I taped them to the wall above the fold-out couch. No frame. Just a strip of clear tape corners curling slightly. Her drawings didn't ask for display. They just wanted to exist. I stopped turning the television on. The noise felt too careless. I found a rhythm in folding, the towels especially. I stacked them in careful rows even though no one else noticed. There was something clean in the repetition corners, aligned seams hidden, each one laid flat as if nothing had ever spilled on it. Ellie asked once why I folded the towels like napkins. I didn't answer. The cabinet above the fridge held mismatched cups. I kept using the same one chip near the lip handle, smooth from wear. It reminded me of the things that stay useful after they stop looking new. There were no calls. No group messages. No, where are you or come back soon. Rachel's phone buzzed once. She flipped it face down and didn't pick it up. The next day she deleted 3 voicemails and didn't say from whom. Ellie had a habit of crawling into my lap without warning, her small arms wrapping around my waist like she was anchoring something. She never asked permission. She just fit there, like someone who knew instinctively where quiet lives. One evening, Rachel stood by the window and spoke without turning. She used to cry in her sleep. Not anymore. I poured tea into a mug with a small crack at the rim. It held just fine as long as I didn't overfill it. Mom called me ungrateful the last time I said no to Roy. The heater kicked on with a cough. I stirred honey into the mug without looking up. She said I should be lucky someone still claims me. I placed the spoon down gently. Not a clink, just a breath between movement and stillness. That night, Ellie drew 3 hearts. Inside each one was a name, Rachel Ellie, and mine. The letters tilted sideways, uneven but deliberate. She pointed to mine and said, I made yours the biggest. You stay the longest. I nodded and taped it next to the others. When I lay down, I stared at that wall of colour. No symmetry, no planning. Just layers of quiet declarations pinned in place by the hands of a child who'd been forced to learn what absence meant too soon. The water in the radiator gurgled. I didn't reach for a blanket. The cold wasn't unkind. It reminded me I was somewhere new, somewhere untouched by the old agreements where silence wasn't punishment, only pause. I used to think survival looked like holding on, but here in a room smaller than Margaret's pantry, I began to understand it could also mean letting go of anything that tried to reshape me. The apartment was small, but the space inside it didn't belong to anyone else, and that, quietly, was enough. I never knew how loud silence could be until it came with a subject line. There was no greeting, just a line about a tribute event, Barbara Tate's name at the bottom, not even signed. She used to double-space emails obsess over font hierarchy. This one came typed in Arial 11 point, all business, family donor night. Would Claire Ashford be available to represent the estate? The word represent held too many meanings and not enough clarity. A bullet point followed. Your mother suggested you'd be willing. No time, no location, just RSVP by Friday. The cursor blinked next to the draft reply for almost 7 minutes. I closed the laptop without typing anything. Not even a space bar. On the counter sat the note from Ellie's teacher. Ms. Linda had written it, on lined paper, soft edges, careful block letters. Ellie helped calm a friend today during group time. Underneath a smiley face drawn by a child's hand. I pinned it beside the calendar with a magnet shaped like a green frog. The mail came late, tucked between a supermarket ad and a coupon booklet, was a cream-coloured envelope with no return address. The paper inside was stiff, heavy, the kind they used for weddings or death, centered in cursive Heritage Legacy Portrait Series. A subtitle read, Honoring Generations, and then just beneath in serif font Ashford Family Invitation, OSVP required. At the bottom, a line only missing one face. Not, we'd love to see you. Not, we hope you'll join. Just that, a hole to be filled, a nameplate to be slotted in. Rachel stood near the sink when Roy Beckett's name showed up on her phone. Her hand trembled. She didn't say hello. Just held it there like if she didn't move, the call might forget to keep ringing. It went to voicemail, then pinged with a transcript. I deserve a relationship with her. That child carries my name. Rachel didn't reply. She folded the phone in half, slid it into the junk drawer behind the old batteries. The next morning, I found another message, this time from Margaret. Her tone hadn't changed, not even in writing. We're scheduling a photo session for the full estate line. It's already been delayed once. She ended with, let me know if you're able. The frame is waiting. That was the word she chose, frame. Not family. I didn't show Rachel. I just wrote something small in the corner of my planner. Ballpoint ink smudged slightly where my thumb pressed too long. Being needed is not the same as being welcomed. At lunch, Ellie brought over a drawing. 3 people standing in front of a blue house, a circle above them with a smile drawn inside. "It's the sun," she said, though no one had asked. I didn't correct her. I only nodded. Later that evening, I stood by the stove stirring pasta, watching the water catch light like broken glass. Rachel scrolled through her phone, reading a notification aloud, before realizing I was still in the room. Mom's posted a family update, something about gratitude, legacy, all of us coming together. She used an old picture. I'm cropped out. I didn't respond. I reached for the colander, rinsed the pasta too slowly, watching steam fog the window pane. The condensation made the outside world blur into watercolor. When I wiped the table that night, I found a flake of old paint curled beneath the salt shaker. I pressed it between 2 fingers until it cracked. On the shelf above the sink sat an old ceramic mug. One of the ones from the charity event years ago, printed on the side, Ashford Home for Generations. I turned it around so the words faced the wall. Rachel didn't bring it up again. Neither did I. A few days later, a courier left a padded envelope at the door. No signature. Inside, a program brochure for the donor event embossed in gold. On the second page, a lineup of names. My own listed last after cousins I hadn't spoken to in a decade after Margaret's second husband. No mention of Rachel. No line for Ellie. Just mine. There was no RSVP card. Only a contact number. Below it, a single sentence. "We hope to finalize the display soon." I folded the paper into 4 squares and slipped it into a drawer with expired coupons and old post-it notes. The next time Ellie drew something, it was a picture of 3 houses on separate hills. One with a dog, one with a tree, one with a swing set. None of them had a fence. She explained nothing. I nodded again. That night, I didn't check my inbox. I didn't return the call from Barbara. I didn't forward the flyer to Rachel. Instead, I opened a fresh page in my notebook and wrote down a single line. They only reach for what they can use. Then I underlined it. Twice. I didn't know healing could be so quiet, so ordinary. The mornings settled into a rhythm that didn't ask for permission. I rose before the others boiled water in the old silver kettle with the worn black handle and let the steam fog the small kitchen window. There was airline crack in the glass that ran from corner to corner like a map someone had etched with intention, but forgot to finish. I didn't rush anymore. I folded dish towels with edges squared brewed tea that steeped for too long and stood barefoot until the floor grew cold beneath me. I wrote grocery lists in pencil. I didn't erase anything, even when plans changed. The library offered me a position as community assistant part-time, but permanent. My badge had my full name on it, Claire Ashford. No title, no department, just a quiet kind of presence. I didn't ask for anything more. I organized the circulation shelf every Wednesday. I liked the way the spines aligned without needing to speak. I liked how people returned things when they were ready, not always on time, but with intention. Some overdue books came with apologies. Others came wrapped in silence. I preferred the latter. Rachel had her first full appointment with Dr. Caldwell that week. She left the house with her hair tied back in a red scarf she hadn't worn since college. When she returned, she didn't speak much. She just stood by the sink, rinsing a single spoon for longer than it needed. "Do you want to talk about it?" I asked. She shook her head once. Not yet. That was enough. I handed her the towel without comment. She dried the spoon and placed it back in the drawer where it belonged. Ellie's school sent home a flyer with a photo of her holding a crayon microphone, reading her poem aloud. They called it Poetry Circle. She said her line about the cloud that didn't follow me home made 2 kids laugh and 1 teacher cry. She didn't know why. Each evening she drew something new. One night, it was a jar filled with stars labeled Things a Keep. Another time it was 3 circles holding hands. I didn't ask for explanations. I just hung them on the wall one by one with small pieces of tape, the corners curled by morning. I left them like that. Judge Whitman reached out again, this time through a letter. His handwriting still looked like typeface, too straight, too practiced. He used phrases like good faith reconciliation and final opportunity for family mediation. He added a postscript in blue ink. I trust you'll choose wisely. I didn't call him back. Instead, I opened the back drawer of my desk, where I kept things I hadn't thrown away, but no longer needed, expired insurance cards, a photo of our childhood backyard without anyone in it, the receipt from Ellie's first winter coat. I placed the letter there without folding it. It didn't deserve that kind of attention. Later that week, I started saying no. No. I'm not available for mediation. No, I won't be attending the family event. No, I don't need clarification. No, I don't want updates. The refusals weren't loud. They didn't slam doors. They didn't leave bruises. But they left space. Barbara Tate emailed again. There's a donor gala next month. Your mother said you'd be willing to represent the Ashfords at the table. Let me know if we should reserve your name card. I didn't reply. Roy Beckett called Rachel. He didn't ask about Ellie. He said I still have a right to see her, whether or not your sister approves. Rachel placed the phone on the table without a word. She didn't cry. She just opened the back door and stood outside for a long time, coatless, arms crossed. A handwritten invitation arrived the next day from my mother. The front read, Legacy Portrait Series, a family celebration. Inside we're missing 1 face for the frame to be complete. You know who. There was no apology, no context, only a nameplate-sized gap dressed as a request. I read it while drinking tea. The bag had steeped too long, and the cup had gone cold. I didn't warm it up. That weekend, Ellie brought out the small ceramic bowl we used for the game, the one where we wrote down old phrases and watched them dissolve. She called it the quiet forgetting. I gave her a marker and 3 slips of paper. She handed one to Rachel, one to me, and kept one for herself. Rachel wrote slowly, folded carefully. I caught a glimpse. You were always too much work. Ellie drew something instead, a grey scribble that looked like a tangled shoelace. She dropped it in the water without ceremony. I stared at my own blank slip longer than I meant to. Then I wrote 4 words in cursive I hadn't used in years. You should have been quieter. The paper curled as it sank. Ellie watched eyes following the ink as it bled into softness. Afterward, she wiped the edge of the bowl with a dishcloth like it needed tending. Then she looked up. Grandma used to smile when I brought her drawings. Why did she stop? I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I answered. Some people love because they want to share space. Others love because they want to own it. You didn't do anything wrong. You just stopped letting her decide which kind you deserved. Ellie nodded once the way children do when they understand more than they know how to say. That night, I stayed up after they'd gone to bed. I took out a small notebook I hadn't used since the move. I wrote one sentence on a fresh page. Dignity doesn't have to be proven. Only lived. Then I turned the page blank side up and placed it beneath the bowl on the windowsill. I didn't need to reread it. The wind knocked softly against the glass the way it does when it wants to remind you it's still there, but doesn't need to come in. I didn't check my phone. I didn't check the locks. I just listened. And I knew some things don't return. They don't need to. Some endings don't echo. They just stop. Others leave a trace behind, faint glue marks on wood paper edges softened by folding, or a voice that still sounds like authority even when you don't answer. The form came in a plain white envelope with a barcode and no return address. I had to check the back twice to remind myself it wasn't from them. It sat unopened on the windowsill for 2 days, beside a chipped mug I hadn't used since the move. The sun bleached one side of the paper slightly, like it too had been waiting for permission. When I finally opened it, I used the letter opener from the library's Lost and Found. The blade had initials etched into the handle LTR, but no one had come back for it. I kept it in the pencil holder on my desk next to the stamps I no longer used, and the thank you card from Ellie's teacher I still hadn't replied to. I unfolded the form carefully, smoothing the creases flat. 1 page. Government seal. A line for the old name. A line for the new. I wrote, slowly. My hand didn't shake. I didn't rehearse. I chose the name not to make a point, but because I was finished being spoken for. No one knew I submitted it. Not Rachel. Not Ellie. Not the women at the community centre who now greeted me by name when I dropped off flyers. I mailed it during a grocery run between boxes of rice crackers and a bag of coffee grounds. No ceremony, just postage and quiet. The certificate arrived exactly 17 days later. I didn't open it right away. I placed it beneath a stack of utility bills, letting it breathe there until the weight of its silence became unmistakable. Then one morning, I made tea in the silver pot I had polished 3 times, but never quite restored. I sat at the kitchen table with a butter knife beside me, and I sliced the envelope open along its top. The document was cleaner than I expected, official but plain. The new name printed in serif font the same size as the one before it. Not larger, not bolder, just there, centered, settled, underneath a signature I didn't recognize until I realized it was mine, unapologetic, uncorrected. At work, I waited until the building emptied for lunch. The nameplate on my door was held by 2 rusted screws and a strip of clear adhesive. I worked them loose with slow turns. Ashford, Clare. The A was slightly smudged, like it had been wiped one too many times with the wrong cloth. I laid it gently on a stack of printer paper, then wiped the surface underneath with a tissue. The glue left behind formed a ghost outline, proof only for those who knew what had been there. That night, I found the old tin box Ellie once used to store crayons. She had outgrown it, months ago, moving on to plastic trays and labelled drawers. I cleaned it out, dusted its corners, and placed the nameplate inside. On top, I laid a folded copy of the legal renunciation form I'd sent Margaret. The envelope had gone out without a note, just the documents, and a small drawing Ellie had left on the coffee table. 3 stick figures beneath a crooked roof, each holding one corner of a shared red heart. In uneven letters, it read, "No yelling here." Rachel stood at the sink, peeling a cucumber with short strokes. The blade clicked against the ceramic edge. "There was a letter from the foundation," she said. "They're removing your name from the plaque at the hospital wing." I assumed. "They said something about archival consistency. They don't archive what they never saw." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Later that week, I received an email from Judge Whitman's office asking if I would consider acting as a neutral party in a family mediation request. The subject line read, "In the spirit of restoration." The body of the email offered no names, but I didn't need them. I clicked delete without opening the attachment. Some things no longer required clarification. I updated my bank records, changed the emergency contact to NA. I crossed out the Ashford name on the back of my library card and rewrote the new one with a felt-tip pen. It bled slightly into the laminate. I didn't wipe it clean. One afternoon, while sorting winter clothes for donation, I found an old wool scarf, navy blue, with a faint wine stain at one corner. My mother had given it to me the year I moved back in. "At least you'll look like someone reliable," she had said. I folded it once, then again, then I placed it into the donation box without a label. A week later, I received a voicemail from Margaret. I listened once, all the way through. "You can change the papers, Claire, but you can't change what runs in your blood. This has always been your place, whether you accept it or not." I didn't respond. Instead, I walked to the closet, reached for the flannel Ellie had once dragged across every room of our first apartment, and wrapped it around the tin box. It no longer smelled like mothballs. Just fabric. Now. The next day, I slipped the box onto the top shelf behind extra linens and expired coupons. Not buried, just placed. Out of reach. Out of sight. But not out of truth. Ellie passed me a drawing later that evening. A sun with sunglasses. A house with no doors. A girl holding hands with a tree. She said the tree never yells, Ellie explained. I nodded. Trees don't try to own you. She grinned and returned to her markers. She didn't ask why I smiled back. There was no goodbye letter, no press release, no email signature update. I left the name at the door. And this time I didn't check to see if anyone noticed. I no longer measure mornings by what they lack. I woke before the kettle clicked, before the first rustle from the hallway. The alarm stayed silent. The phone faced down its screen dim. I didn't reach for it. Instead, I filled the porcelain pot with filtered water, watching the air rise from the spout in faint clouds. I wiped the edge of the table, where the lacquer had dulled where elbows once leaned too long. The grain showed through now, honest worn. The fridge door clicked open with a soft tug. Ellie's drawing fluttered slightly where she had taped it last week. A maple tree leaned over 3 figures, their bodies made of straight lines, their heads round and smudged with orange crayon. Beneath it, in slanted print, "This is home." No yelling, just soup and books. I opened the drawer I didn't open often. Inside, a violet ribbon tied in a loose loop frayed at the ends. A folded letter addressed but never sealed. The paper had yellowed at the crease words paused mid-thought, written too late or too early. Next to it, a silver ring. No inscription. Slightly dented. I had found it in the lining of Rachel's coat that night on the porch when she arrived soaked and silent. I didn't light a match. I didn't shred the paper or toss the ring into the trash. I simply folded them tighter, pressed them into the corner of a small cedar box, and turned the brass lock until it clicked. That was enough. Rachel shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing her temple. She didn't ask how I slept. I didn't offer her tea. She sat at the end of the counter, glancing at the open book beside my cup. "You always reread the same ones. They get better when you're not trying to finish them." Ellie rolled in a minute later, her blanket trailing behind like a cape. She climbed into the breakfast stool, her chin resting on her palms. "Aunt Claire." she murmured. Don't do work today. I wasn't planning to, I answered, tapping the spine of the book. I just wanted to hear how this one ends again. We didn't talk about her grandmother, or the court date, or the last letter I sent with no return address. We didn't need to. The silence no longer split the room. It folded into the corners, rested on the shelves, tucked itself beneath the cushions, like something that belonged not an absence, but a decision. The herbs on the windowsill had begun to reach. Basil leaning toward the blinds, rosemary curling toward the sink. Rachel whispered something to Ellie about planting more, about moving the mint outside now that the frost had lifted. I didn't join the conversation. I watched the steam rise again, this time from my cup, the scent of jasmine, soft and almost gone. At noon, I found the old cloth folded at the edge of the garden table, the same one I had wrapped the nameplate in. Now it lined the base of a clay pot, cushioning the young mint shoots as they leaned against the chill. The cloth had faded at the corners, but its warmth stayed. It held nothing now. It protected something else. The back gate creaked once. I didn't turn my head. Thought about calling Rachel, murmured as she passed, pressing a bag of soil into her hip. Didn't think you'd want to talk about the email. No need. They said we could submit a joint statement. For the archives. Archives are for people still explaining. She said nothing more. The bag of soil dropped near the planter with a gentle thud. I returned to my tea. Later that afternoon, Ellie placed a new drawing on the fridge. A tree again, this time with roots. They're holding on to each other, she explained. So they don't fly away. I see. No names this time, she added. Names can be changed. She skipped out of the room before I could reply. That evening, I shelved the final documents, the last ones that bore my old signature. I didn't tear them. I didn't highlight what had changed. I placed them behind the books I no longer loaned out, beside an envelope of loose photographs, faces that once needed framing. Now they only needed space. No one called, no one knocked, no one offered closure. I didn't mark the day on a calendar. I didn't frame the certificate or post about the new address. I signed nothing with flourish. I simply remained. When the last rays stretched across the porch, I stepped outside with the same teacup from morning, its handle faintly chipped. I didn't sit. I didn't pace. I just stood there, watching as Ellie covered her hands in soil, and Rachel pressed a thumb into a seedling's roots. No music played. No toast was raised. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need them to see. Living, I've learned, doesn't always ask for proof. It just asks that you stay still.